Okay. Directors Larry Stransky,
Yes.
Richie Wasserman,
Here.
Mike Cimolino,
Here.
Michael Carter,
Here.
Rex Jackman,
Here.
and Chair Dan Judy.
Here.
And we expect Supervisor Krosky to be here very soon. We're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, immediately recess and as the Regional Transportation Agency, and convene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And the first thing on the agenda is public expression. Members of the public are welcome. Oh, number two. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me refresh my agenda.
Good old hard copies. Yeah, the paper is always good.
I think it is, yeah.
All right. Number two is report of Executive Director, succession, and appreciation.
Okay, is this thing on? All right. This is kind of an unusual meeting and the usual sequence of events here. If some of you have been around long enough to when we secured the last contract, and one of the things that came up was succession planning, and that was an item that I had to deal with in the last contract, and which was, I think, 4 years ago when we started. And at that time I named myself as the executive director with the understanding that changes may be made in the future. My contract to provide administration for MCOG goes through September of 2019. It was kind of determined that changing right at the fiscal year was probably not a good time, because bring on a new contractor, because you're always spending a month and a half cleaning up for the prior fiscal year, getting all the audit information done and everything, and it'd be better to go another quarter before there's any kind of changing of the guard. So Down Associates has an admin contract that goes through September 2019. I had planned on continuing through the end of this contract as the executive director. Most of you probably know that I had a pretty serious health issue that came up at the end of April, first part of May. I didn't know where I was, and so I can't tell you what day it really was, but it was about in there. And what I have found is that it was a stroke, and it does preclude me continuing as your executive director. There are some fairly serious short-term memory losses that I have. I'm not going to get into all the details, but I may look okay, but I ain't. So I cannot continue this job. So I have therefore appointed Nephili Barrett here to assume my position as executive director through the end of our contract. Nephili has worked 20 years with MCOG in various positions, 16 of which were for me, and she has the right mix of experience to take over with very little help from the outside. We're all going to be helping each other as we continue this. I want to tell you that as you probably don't think about much, but you should know that you have two contractors. One is Down Associates for the admin. The planning is handled by Davey Bates' staff. And since this happened, I got to tell you, everybody is committed to working through this transition period, and honoring our contractual commitments as much as possible. Going on, there are plenty of unresolved issues, as there always are, but if there's any good news to this, a number of things are out of the way. The Regional Transportation Plan is adopted and complete and good for a number of years. This is not a STIP year. That's going to be next year, so you don't have to go through this complex process of looking at what kind of project we might be looking at for the State Transportation Improvement Program. And here we go, I lost my place. And the non-infrastructure project that we had assumed from the county from HSS is winding down, will be done at the end of this calendar year. The wrap-up will continue into the spring, but that long project is wrapping up. We have a number of other active transportation programs, processes that are just in the initial stages, so the timing of transition into those could be a lot worse. I do have a couple of issues of concern for the future, well, that we are in the middle of, and one is the active transportation project in Covelo, in which we have been brought into court over. That process is continuing. It's a very important project. I believe that we'll get that resolved in the next few months, but that is moving forward, and it's currently in a design phase. Nothing is being held up by that lawsuit as it stands right now. Another one is a very important similar type project in Wallala that is reaching ahead in the next few months about what's going to happen. It's a community that also lacks bicycle and pedestrian projects, and it's not a really great place to be walking alongside the roadway. There's some controversy there. That's another one that's pending. It will need some resolution in the next few months. I just want to say that the people that we have working with both Davy Bates and Down Associates have been here many decades, and so we're not turning things over to a bunch of people that have minimal experience. I've worked with MCOG either as a transportation planner initially in 1981 to the executive director since I don't know how many years it's been, but the answer is not 2, but a number of years. And I want to thank this board in having trust with Down Associates for the past decades, and we're not done yet. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I suspect some of the employees would like to say a few words, and maybe 1 or 2 members of the audience. So anyone want to add any comments or observations?
Yeah, I'll say something. So, of course, I'd like to thank Phil for this opportunity, but also for the example that he has set for the last 2 decades. He has shown the importance of staying involved across the entire county, not just the larger towns, but the small communities as well. He has shown how valuable building strong relationships with our local agencies as well as Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission is. He's been a champion of rural causes in Sacramento when not very many people were speaking up for the rural counties. And he's shown the importance of the perseverance that it takes to see important projects through to the end. So I want to thank Phil, and he's still going to be around a little bit to keep us on track, but he's done a great job of paving the way for us all to continue to be successful. And I'm grateful to be surrounded by staff at Dow and at Davy Bates Consulting that are great at what they do and will enable us to continue to serve MCOG as we have been doing.
I'll try to keep it brief, but I just wanted to say a few words about Phil and mentors and you know, people who I've worked with over the years. There have been a handful of people who I would consider to be a mentor. Most of the time, that person is somebody who knows the technical side of things and is able to you know, teach you about how to do the job. I think in the case of Phil, he's somebody who, you know, when he speaks, people listen to him, and it's not just because of that distinctive voice that he has. It's because he knows what he's talking about, and he speaks the truth. And you know, he didn't just show me, or I didn't just learn, you know, how to do the job by working with him. I also learned about a lot of the other things that are more important than the job. You know, just everything else, basically. So just wanted to thank you, Phil, for being a mentor in more than just the work sense. Thanks.
Okay. Supervisor McCowan.
Thank you, Chair Jurdy. I just wanted to also add my congratulations to Phil Dow for a job well done. No one has been more steadfast in watchdogging projects important to Mendocino County, networking and building the relationships with state and federal planning staff and personnel, so that when he would go to meetings related to any of our projects, he at least had a foot in the door to be able to make the case and I believe make it with a full array of facts carefully marshaled to support the position. You know, his staff reports and letters that he drafts are always very well laid out, logically follow one point on another. Now, my major concern with Phil's retirement, who will give the acronym speech when others retire? Who will be there to say the RTP and the STIP, not to be confused with the RHNA and so forth? So that will leave a void here in Mendocino County that may never be filled, at least certainly not to the degree you have. But,
Oh, you nailed it.
but you know, and I did serve on MCOG for 4 years when I was on the city council, and intermittently since I've been with the county. But the citizens of the county do owe a debt of gratitude to you, Phil, so thank you.
I don't want to repeat what others have said, but one thing that I think a lot of people won't necessarily know is that more than 2 decades ago, Phil really led the effort to have polling done throughout Mendocino County to find out the level of support for a local sales tax in each of the cities and in the county to support repaving the roads. And more than 2 decades ago, with that information, City of Willits voters and City of Willits went ahead with it, put it on the ballot, it passed. Point Arena, it passed. I don't remember which one was first, but they were the first and second. Fort Bragg put it on the ballot. It didn't pass the first time. Later on, I was on the City Council. We put it on the ballot again, and it did pass, and it's passed again as a renewal with a 10-year sunset. And in the Fort Bragg example, the polling didn't quite show a 2/3 support, but you know, we learned something from that poll. That, for example, the group of people who felt that paving the roads was most important were actually women over 55. I think that's how they broke it out. But the ones who were least supportive of the sales tax were women over 55. So we kind of concluded, wait a second, I think they just don't think they can afford a sales tax. So we kind of quantified, what does a half-cent sales tax mean to an average person? And it was, I don't know now what it was, but maybe like 50 cents a month or something. Is pretty nominal. And so when people saw that anecdotal information, it passed with about 73% of the vote. And it's been a big, big improvement in Point Arena, Willits, and Fort Bragg, and now Ukiah with theirs. The county hasn't quite gotten there yet, but the improvements in Fort Bragg, Willits, and now Ukiah are really, really significant. So I just wanted to mention that.
Chair Jurdy and the rest of the council, I'm Matt Brady, the District Director for Caltrans District 1, and this is a sad day for me. Phil has been nothing short of an inspiration for many of us, working very closely with him on projects such as Simpson Lane, the Hopland Bypass, and of course the Willits Bypass, which took a little longer than I think any of us had hoped for. But you know what? Because of Phil and his never-ending attitude of let's get it done, I'll be your partner, let's stick through it. He did get it done, as did the rest of this council. So it is a sad day for me. Phil has been threatening to retire a few times over the years. He's been known to pass that by. But I realize he has created quite the succession planning. He's gotten Nephili to step right in his footsteps, and I'm excited for her and the rest of MCOG. But nonetheless, not to drag this on, Phil, but we always looked at you and said, what would Phil do? Let's do it the Phil Dow way. So we wanted to memorialize that with a little sign that we went ahead and had created for Phil here. So, Rex, you give me a hand? Sure. Let's see. Get it out. Oh. There you go. Yeah. Phil Dow way to the Willits Bypass.
Something for your man cave.
But Phil, we're very proud of you, and always feared this day, but I wish you the best. You're a great friend, too.
Where's that going to go?
Let's stand up there together and reenact the handshake.
Where is that going to go on the freeway?
It's going to designate my parking spot.
I wanted to say one or two things too. You've already covered a lot of it, but I prepared a couple remarks I wanted to remember to say. And I know Nephili's going to do a great job, and I just wanted to recognize Phil a little bit. I think most people don't have any idea of all that Phil Dow has done for Mendocino County. In fact, all the rural counties in California, as has been mentioned, and especially for our smaller communities, where he's navigated the complexities of the transportation funding and persevering through that long process, as you said, to meet their needs and providing that continuity. It really takes a long time to get things done, and he's been right there all the way. He's gone above and beyond what the job of executive director requires, and because he cares and he's a leader. And I think some have unfairly portrayed him as just a promoter of freeways, read Willits Bypass, when that was going on. Unaware or just not recognizing the many ways in which Phil has fostered bicycle and pedestrian improvements, public transit, all the transportation modes, as well as local community plans and preferences. And I will never forget how Phil supported my initiatives to develop electric vehicle plans and infrastructure. Even 20 years ago, when this wasn't mainstream yet, and he wasn't necessarily a true believer at that time, but had my back anyway. I really appreciate that. And I think maybe we've convinced him by now, I hope, on some of those things. And
got my 4x4 pickup.
We'll get you an electric pretty soon. But Phil has just been the best boss ever and still is for another year or so. And I just wanted to say these things in public while we have this opportunity. I'm sure we'll celebrate his retirement some more. But for today, this feels like a momentous occasion. And we'll miss his presence and great good humor here in these chambers. So thank you, Phil.
Lisa?
Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Davy Bates, for those of you who may not know me, and I have the planning contract between MCOG and Davy Bates Consulting. And I just want to say that I've worked with Phil for 19 years now. And I still call him my boss, even though I've had my own business and contract for 4.5 years, but I still view him as, you know, my mentor and my hero. I would not be here today without him. And so it is a sad day, but he is an amazing man, and he's going to be around us for another 1.5 years. And I just want to let you all know that we're all here today because of him, and he's been a great teacher, and you are supported by a good group of people. And I just want to thank you too, Phil.
I just want to share a personal story about Phil.
Go to the mic.
A personal story that you may not know, because you all see his public side and private, professional side. But many years ago, when I came to work for Phil, he was, and he still has been, working in Lake County part-time contract there. And there was a program to transport people to a dental clinic, I believe in San Francisco, right? There was no Lake Transit at that time, and it was often elderly people on fixed incomes who could not afford the small fee. I think it might have been $15, I don't remember. And time after time, without telling anyone, Phil would pay the fee for these people. He would just do it. He would know they couldn't afford it, or they might even say they couldn't go, and he would just sign them up and pay their fee. And I want you to know that about him. He has the admiration and respect from all of us. I was his first employee, and we love him.
Yeah.
And we're in good hands with Nafili. We love her too, so you guys don't have to worry about you don't have to worry about MCOG. Thank you.
That's Loretta Ellard.
Get on with the agenda.
It's just really hard for us. It's kind of an emotional thing, so.
I do want to say that we will follow up at a later meeting with formal recognition, and then plan for a celebration of retirement closer to the end of the contract period. So this isn't the end. You're not done listening to us yet.
Okay.
I don't want to do this again. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right, well, if we're going to go on to the next, the agenda is public hearing, adoption of the resolution M 2018, adopting a methodology for the 2018 Regional Housing Needs Assessment.
Okay, so the Regional Housing Needs Assessment is a process where we receive a regional determination of needed housing units. It's assigned to us by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. It's spread across income levels. We then go through a process working with local agencies to allocate those needed units across the various jurisdictions, and then the jurisdictions each use those numbers to develop their housing elements. Before we can adopt an allocation, we have to adopt a methodology. So this is the methodology statement that is included in the staff report. Was developed with a committee made up of representatives of MCOG and planning staff from all the cities and the county. So I'll just quickly read through this. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. We need to do a finding of proper notice. I'm getting ahead of myself. So this actually required a 60-day notice, and it was noticed in the Ukiah Daily Journal on April 4th. I have the legal notice, the proof of publication here.
Do we have a finding of proper legal notice? Does someone want to make that finding? Motion?
I'll make a motion that we have proper legal notice.
Second it.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay. So the methodology statement says that as part of the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, the Mendocino Council of Governments will allocate the housing need among its member agencies, the cities of Ukiah, Fort Bragg, Willits, and Point Arena, and County of Mendocino using the following methodology. A Regional Housing Needs Allocation Methodology Committee will be formed and made up of representatives from each of these cities and the county. Tribal governments within the region will also be invited to participate in the process. MCOG will work cooperatively with this committee to determine an allocation based on the following factors: current population distribution and trends, past development trends, availability of appropriately zoned land, annexation opportunities, zoning change and general plan amendment impacts, availability of resources and infrastructure services, 2013 housing allocation, vacancy rates, tribal population housing development, limitations and challenges to housing and land resulting from recent wildfires, and potential impacts of recent housing-related legislation, including SB 35. So this was presented at the May MCOG meeting as well, but today it is before you for adoption by resolution, and we will hold a public hearing prior to adoption. The actual allocation of the numbers will then come back in the at the August meeting. That also requires a 60-day notice, and we've been working with local agencies on that allocation. We received a total determination of 3,845 units for the 8.7-year planning period that this RHNA process covers. We do believe that that number is high, although it does include the units that will be needed to replace those lost in the fires. We have submitted an appeal to the state, but we won't receive a response on that appeal until probably the end of June. So in the meantime, we are moving forward developing an allocation using the current determination.
So you've partially answered the question that I had, which is because in the past, if a city or county wasn't able to provide enough land with the zoning to meet those numbers, there really weren't many consequences. But now there's some new consequences in that. I think my understanding is that the ability to make some land use decisions that are discretionary currently would be taken away by the state, at least over time, if you failed to meet the numbers. There's ramifications that there weren't in the past, and there's also more legislation also along those lines.
Yes.
That could add additional ramifications. So I guess what I'm just kind of curious is to what extent, if say the planning departments for the county and the cities feel that they can't identify enough land to meet these numbers, although definitely we need several thousand housing units, or certainly several hundred, what's our appeal process and our ability to argue those numbers back if the land just isn't there that has adequate water and sewer?
So the appeal that we've submitted to the state, it would be up to the Department of Housing and Community Development to adjust the regional determination. It's possible that maybe due to the fires and the special circumstances that they could adjust it, although I am not going to hold my breath that that's going to happen. Fortunately, we're a rural county, which means that the number of jurisdictions that are working through this process is small, and they all work well together. The committee has been very cooperative in sort of understanding each jurisdiction's limitations. So the allocation that you see come back in August will reflect that. You'll see more the higher density development allocated, or what you would typically expect to be higher density development in the lower income categories, allocated to the cities, and then the higher density allocated in the unincorporated area. But they are all of the committee members are recognize that everybody has limitations, and so they're trying to work together to come up with an allocation that everybody is capable of meeting.
Okay. The main point I wanted to make was it seems like everybody's looking at consequences that they didn't face in the past. And
Right. Yes, there are. So the one that I'm familiar with is SB 35. I know there are a number of other pieces of legislation that have been proposed. SB 35 requires streamlining for developments that have a certain percentage of low or very low income housing in jurisdictions that are not meeting their housing element goals for development. But of course, the tricky part is that the jurisdictions themselves usually are not the ones doing the development. That's up to private developers coming in. But so they just have to make the conditions, they have to make land suitable for housing available. But yeah, there are some consequences now that did not previously exist.
Okay. So we need to open the public hearing next.
Yes.
So at 2:06, we'll open the public hearing. And do we have any public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public hearing at 2:07.
Okay.
Any board comments or motions? Someone want to move
I'll
to
make
approve?
a motion to approve the resolution number M 2018.
I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Oh, you need a roll call for the resolution?
We do.
Oh, roll
Sorry.
call because it's, okay.
Yeah, for the resolution.
Okay. Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Chimolino,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Krosky,
Yes.
Jackman,
I don't think I vote on this.
Oh, right, because we're not,
Okay,
we're
sorry.
still policy advisory, or
and then
no.
Chair Judy.
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Okay, now we're going to convene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, recess, and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. Do we have any public comment on non-agenda items? Looking at the June meeting agenda instead of the May agenda. Not seeing any, we'll go directly into item number 7, which is fiscal year 18-19 RTPA budget.
I'll take that one. You have my staff report, and you have a document like this either printed or electronically. And that contains an overview, some reference material, and all the findings for the resolutions necessary to make the allocations. And those are detailed in the accompanying exhibits. So a month ago, on May 7th, we had our budget workshop and we went over all this in detail. There are a few loose ends I need to tie up to get this adopted. So I just wanted to go over the few things that were left hanging there that we've now resolved. Starting with administration. We had a minor item here, a $2,000 subcontract that we have with Redwood Coast Energy Authority for the North Coast and Upstate Fuel Cell Vehicle Readiness Plan. And that was carried over from 2016-17, and we've used up all the money. That whole project is going to be wrapped up in a couple of months. Should be done by September, I think so. So we took that out of the administrative budget. And the next thing was the active transportation program, and that was the infrastructure grant for the Colo Trail project. And we just needed to come up with an estimate of funds to carry over from the previous fiscal year. And there are new funds coming along. The grant is about $3 million, but it's coming to us in phases as we go through segments of the project. So we now have those numbers. We're carrying over $422,173, and we have up to $251,000 of new money that will come in the fiscal year 2018-19. And where these are showing up are in the, I should be looking in this. We have this in the two spreadsheets. We have the short summary and the longer summary. So those had said pending before, and now I plugged in those numbers. And I believe those turn up, I think not that. I think that's really where you're going to see it. It's not in the planning program or anything else. In the planning program, we did have anticipated carryover. Funds that weren't spent in the previous fiscal year, and we told you that was coming. The draft transportation program, which Loretta will talk more about, had $565,475. Now the total is $1,221,126, and that's in the first allocating resolution for administration, bike and ped, and planning. So there is a chart, this chart here, that's also in the work program. It shows all the funding sources, and this is Exhibit B of the first resolution on number 3. So that was the planning. And moving on to unmet, excuse me, the second resolution, unmet transit needs. We had to have a meeting of the Transit Committee, which it didn't happen until May 17th. So the Transit Productivity Committee met, and they had several jobs to do, a performance review for the year, reviewing and recommending on MTA's annual claim for funding, and also making a recommendation on which of the needs of unmet transit needs on the list were reasonable to meet according to our definition. So they did meet, and they recommended 5 needs as reasonable to meet, and those are listed in this resolution. And then we had the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council come and meet a second time. They're the ones who start out the annual process in November. We have a workshop that's kind of like a brainstorming workshop, and come up with a list of needs. And that's the list we've been working with, along with anything that came out of the December public hearing. So MTA had analyzed that, brought that to us for both of these committee meetings. And as I said, 5 of those were chosen to move forward, that rose to the top for the Transit Committee. And now the Social Services Transportation Advisory Council, which is a different kind of membership. It's got some agency representation and social services and some other people involved in that are stakeholders. And they wanted to add 2 more needs to that list. So I've handed out a revised resolution. You should have this on your table there. And it says revised draft. That's this handout for 7B. And now we have 7 needs that are recommended as reasonable to meet that we'd like you to adopt. I could read this off. Do you think I should read this off? Or? It's in the packet, but not the new needs. So, well, just to quickly summarize for anybody interested in this that's listening, we had design of more shuttle routes in Ukiah. I added the word in Ukiah, or the phrase, because that was specified in our review. that remove parking downtown as well as increase housing. With smaller buses, people would ride. Actually, the smaller buses has been kind of debunked as people don't necessarily not want to ride the larger buses. So, but in any case, MTA has its own route committee of drivers that are going to be meeting over the next 6 months. And they are looking at all these ideas and ways to make better use of their existing resources. So that was the first one. The addition of a one-day round trip from Ukiah to Point Arena. And that seemed to be feasible and would probably help increase ridership, maybe be good for the local economy. The third was service to the Willits Pool and High School. And those are not very far off of the fixed route that's in Willits now, and they thought they could probably make that happen. The next one was Ukiah fixed route and dial-a-ride service starting a half hour earlier in the mornings for transportation to jobs for the clients of the Ukiah Valley Association for Rehabilitation. Did I say that right? I think that's what UVAH stands for. There are people that go to jobs and needed an earlier bus. They think they can do that. MTA believes they could do that. The fifth one was wheelchair accessible door-through-door assisted services for seniors and disabled adults on Wednesdays in the Ukiah area. That's because the Ukiah Senior Center has had to cut some of their service to make ends meet, and they were not providing the Wednesday service. And so we think we can get that done with the addition of some resources. And then the two remaining that were added by the SS TAC group are non-emergency medical transportation for out of the service area and out of the service hours for seniors and disabled adults. And this is something the Ukiah Senior Center is working very hard on, and they have they've got a plan going now. They're putting together, they've been doing some fundraising, and they just need a little more help to get that to happen. It's a very high priority for these stakeholders. And the last one is service for isolated, and we added the phrase, and inaccessible seniors and disabled adults. So this is kind of that last mile. It's hard to get to a bus or some kind of transportation, and MTA thinks it can find a way, and along with the senior centers that provide transportation, to pick people up and get them where they need to go. So at least get a start at that. That's kind of a broad need all over the county, but to at least make a start and start to meet some of those needs. So those were the 7 that are on the table out of this list of 18 that we had. And the recommended finding, it's not so much that we have money to put into this today with this budget we're adopting, so we added some contingencies of how we can make that happen. And so the recommended finding is this. MCOG finds that there are unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet for fiscal year 2018-19, contingent on review of existing routes. That's that route committee that's meeting. Update of the funding formula for senior centers transportation contracts. I'll go back to that in a sec. And potential new revenues through the Federal Transit Administration Section 5311 program as identified on the fiscal year 18-19 list, and I just read you those. So the thing about the senior centers transportation contracts, this is something that's been that's come up in our last 2 or 3 triennial performance audits for both MTA and MCOG. We've had this body funds the senior center transportation is subsidized, and for going back so far, no one remembers how it was devised. There was kind of a funding split among the 5 senior centers in the county. So it seems like it's maybe gotten a little out of kilter. Some are providing more transportation and getting maybe less money than they need for that. Some are providing less transportation but get more money than they need. So the idea is to go back, revisit that formula, and that might actually help free up some funds for those that are providing these services. So that's the idea there. We're going to spend some time revisiting that and just tackle it. Nobody really knows how it got started, but it's finally kind of risen to the top as it's time to address it. And the 5311 program, that's also on your agenda today under consent calendar. It's just an annual operating assistance formula, regional apportionment that comes to us from Mendocino County. MTA is the only one who can take advantage of it. That's a little bit higher this year. It's about 18,000 or so higher this year. And they think they can do something with that. So that is the recommended finding. And what we can do, I'll go back and see if there's anything else I had to report, but I want to spend a little time on that. That was the main item we didn't really know when I saw you in May. But we can come back and adopt these all at once. Let's see, I talked about, okay, so the next one is still transit. We needed to review MTA's transit claim. And I had only just received that when I saw you in May. And it goes through a little bit of analysis. The committee looks at it. And of course, some of you are on that. We've got 2 MCOG board members. We had alternates at the time last month, and 2 MTA board members and 1 senior center representative. So between those 5 people, they make a recommendation on the claim for funding, and that's the next resolution in your budget. And I'll take questions once I plow through all this. We have an allocating, this is the third one in, allocating resolution for Mendocino Transit Authority. So that's what I'm looking at now. So I'm on page 2 of my staff report here. We have to collect a certain amount of material from MTA to make the findings that are required by the Transportation Development Act to fund their claim with the local transportation funds. That's the quarter-cent sales tax that we get. And they get most of that money, but we have to check off a bunch of things before we can give them that money. So one of the things that we will get by the time they receive any money here is their final adopted budget, and I think that comes at the end of this month. MTA adopts their budget later in the month, I believe. So we'll be getting that. We've seen drafts of it. We need their capital plan for the long-term capital reserve. The claim that you saw did not claim anything for capital reserve. They figured, well, we don't need anything this year. We might as well let the rest sit there. But in order for us to let it sit there in reserve, we must tie it to one or more projects in their capital plan. So we need, they know they have something. They're looking at the Ukiah Transit Center that they're working on. They want to save the money for that, but they've got to show us where that is in their capital plan, and as soon as MTA adopts that, we will get evidence of that. So that was one of the things. Let me see where I am. Those are the major items. As far as other transit funding, in this booklet I've given you, the long spreadsheet has some additional federal transit funding that does not flow through our accounts. We don't have that cash. We don't exactly allocate it in the budget, but MTA has to, MCOG has to approve programming for MTA. So we've listed some of those funding sources now. I've got some more numbers, I think, than I had a month ago. And I've added one. So that was the Federal Transit Administration 5311 and the 5311F program, which is competitive. Those are both on your consent calendar today. We'll get to that. And I added one more that came up very late in the game here. It's called State of Good Repair for Transit. And that, I think, was an existing program before, but Now it's flowing through our state transit assistance program, handled in the same manner as these STA funds that definitely are in our budget, and I think I will have to amend these in at some point. But we do have a number now, and it's $128,995, so it's not a great deal of money, but they will want to claim that, and they'll have to identify what they're planning to do with the money. So that did come up late in the process. My proposal is that we wait until we have an amendment to do and put those funds in at that time. So I think I covered the transit pretty well. We do have enough data from MTA, but they're still a little late on some things. On a performance review, we reviewed data from a year ago. We're still waiting for this year's data, and I know they're going through a lot of software changes and things like that. So we will get that eventually. And also their fiscal audit is running late too. It was due March 31st. Now it's scheduled for June or possibly later. You know, they're going through a big overhaul of their finance system. So these are actually necessary findings. Anything that comes out of the performance review, we did do review enough to do what we need to do for today, but we want to catch up on that. And for fiscal audit, I based the findings on the previous fiscal audit findings, so it had to be the most recent. But I just wanted you to know we're still going after some items that we need from them. So that's everything on transit. I hope I'm not moving too fast. If you had any questions, let me know. Stop me. The final one, I don't have any new numbers, but the fourth resolution was the Regional Surface Transportation Program. And that's its own type of money, color of money. We did have that fund estimate, but what I have done in the resolution on the second page is fill in some of these carried over amounts. We have 3 different programs we're running through that account. So it's a little tricky to track it all, but I got a little caught up on that. They're all detailed out in the narrative here in your resolution for the RSTP funds. And just to briefly summarize, the 3 things that we've got in there are the partnership funding program that comes off the top. That's $100,000 a year by the policy adopted some years back by this body. And that's to do some, you know, kind of cross-jurisdictional types of projects. We will have $1.1 million in that fund once this funding gets allocated in here. And we have 6 ongoing partnership project balances in there. So of about $350,000, and we have about $750,000 available for later. I came up with a number, $747,279. So the fund balance that we have to work with going forward is about $750,000. So we've got to track these 6 projects through and handle their claims and things. And some of those were ones you allocated just a month ago and going back a little farther. So the second program in that is the local assistance, and we have $90,000 a year off the top that's for staff. And we can't use all that under the contract. We can use $79,000. So we have about $10,000 available for assisting the local jurisdictions with things they need done and consistent with the scope of local assistance. And that might be things like engineers' estimates, you know, that kind of project cost. And there is a fund balance, where do I have? About $112,000. And then finally, you got what I already described to you last month, was the remainder all goes out by a formula to the 5 member local governments, the cities and county. So that's $736,865. So about $700,000. I bet that number's going to come down a little bit. We never get quite as much from the federal allocation as they start out estimating, but in that neighborhood. And I think that is everything. Let me know if you have questions on any of that. that is the final budget proposed. And I had some alternatives you could do, alternative actions, but the main thing, just we want you to adopt these resolutions today. So I'll draw a breath and I'll let you think for a second.
I'll move to adopt the resolutions as presented.
Okay.
I'll second.
Nice.
Okay. Motion, second. Any public comment on this item? Any more comment? No? Okay. Roll call.
Right, that's a roll call.
Okay. Stransky,
Yes.
Wasserman,
Yes.
Chivellino,
Yes.
Carter,
Yes.
Krosky,
Yes.
Jackman,
Yes.
and Jurdy.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you very much for bearing with us and all that. Appreciate it.
I have a question. I had heard that at 2:30 we were going to have some people from Senator McGuire's office. Oh, I wasn't sure if you were for this item. So maybe we could just go to that item next.
Okay. We'll come back to...
Okay.
you guys-
So this is consideration of endorsement for Senate Bill 1029, North Coast Rail Authority right-of-way, Great Rail, Redwood Trail Agencies, / Sonoma Marin Area Rapid Transit District. I think, Loretta, do you have a quick summary?
Yes. You have my staff report. Is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You have my staff report before you. As reported at last month's meeting, SB 1029, known as the Great Railroad Trail Act, was introduced by the Senate in February by Senator McGuire, and the most recent version of the bill, amended May 25th, was provided in your packet. As directed by the MCOG board, a letter was sent to Senator McGuire requesting certain amendments regarding the representation on the to-be-created Great Railroad Trail Agency, as well as the representation on the SMART board. And I provided a copy of that letter in your packet. And there was a question at the last meeting regarding the clarification of the exact location of milepost 142.5. And we followed up with the senator's staff, and we're told that it is 1 mile north of the city of Willett's northern city limits at the point where the railroad tracks cross Highway 101. And I'm sure the senator's staff will provide more information on that. And my last comment is that we provided the latest version of the bill that had some significant amendments, and we're hoping for an update from the staff on those amendments. And then we just placed the item on today's agenda for your consideration of endorsement. And the senator's staff is here to respond to any questions you have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Just real quick, my name is Jason Lyles. I am the Senator's Senior Policy Advisor. I work in Sacramento, but I live in Healdsburg, so I spend a lot of time on the road. This has been my passionate project for the Senator for the last 11 or 12 months now that we've been working on. But it's a project that we've been kind of thinking about and kicking around for several years now. So I'm here to answer any questions. I'd be happy to give you a quick update if you want. Does that work? Okay.
Go ahead.
So the May 25th version that staff was referring to is the latest public version. There's about a 2-week lag time between us writing amendments and taking input and writing amendments, and then them getting into a place where they can actually get published. So right now I've got to submit another set of amendments to Legislative Council for the next version, the next hearing, which will be in the Assembly. The Senate Assembly Rules Committee is going to decide today or tomorrow morning where the bill goes over there. Since it passed all 3 committees in the Senate unanimously, it's now over in the Assembly side. They'll decide whether it goes to the Transportation Committee or the Natural Resources Committee or both. So we're preparing for either one and getting our amendments and things ready for there. I will say that this bill is sort of a 2-track process where refining all of the language and getting it as perfect as possible with everything that we're doing, including making sure that amendments are taken and that we're factually correct in it as we go through the process. But there's a separate process in dealing with the bigger issue, which is the funding. As you guys are well aware of, NCRA is $9.8 million in debt. There's some question as to whether it's all accurate debt, whether it's not. There's a lot of debate about whether, who owes what. they're one of the agencies, so the California Transportation Commission is very, very eager, and they're the ones that allocate most of the dollars for these things to get this thing resolved. The Department of Transportation itself in Sacramento is a little sketchier just because they're not as familiar with NCRA, and they keep hearing bad things about NCRA, and they're not sure they believe that the debt is actually $9.8 million. They think it's a little less. So there's a little bit of a feud with it, I shouldn't say a feud, a little bit of a debate within the administration, and when that happens, it gets kicked to the governor's office. The governor's office always refused to engage in anything talking about money until it gets to the second house. Well, last Thursday or Friday, I guess it was, it got to the second house, and so now they're finally engaged in trying to figure out, do they want to find, somewhere between $9 and $12 million to resolve this issue once and for all. And again, this whole issue is set up in 1989 when the governor signed the bill that set NCRA on its path, and then vetoed the financing mechanism that would have given them between $500,000 and $1 million a year to actually accomplish their mission. So they've been struggling literally for the last 30 years with no public funding trying to get that done. Big mess where it is right now. So again, the 2 tracks will be in a committee next week. 2 weeks after that will be an appropriations committee. A week or 2 after that will be on the assembly floor. And all that time, while that's happening, we'll be working on the financing aspect of the bill. So that's where we are right now. Regarding the item for 142.5, the reason it's split there, we're just north of Willits, is it's just sort of the traditional way that the railroad has always been done. It was the ownership actually changed at that point 100 years ago, and it's always sort of been the dividing line between the Russian River and the Eel River Canyon side of the line. There's no other reason for it besides that. If there was a better way to split this up, we would be happy to take a look at that. I've been meeting with the Farm Bureau, up in Humboldt County earlier this morning, and again meeting with Devin and the Farm Bureau folks here, talking about the issues that they have regarding whenever you create a trail, there's always issues of fire, trespassing, people traveling on their lands, graffiti, vandalism, things like that, and they would like a lot of that stuff addressed as much as possible. So we're trying to work that. With that, I'll turn it over to staff or the board. If there's any questions, happy to answer. Happy to take input. Like I said, we're writing amendments as we speak. So.
I think part of the question, the milepost, and you've clarified where that is. I think there was just some lack of clarity in our meeting last month. Where exactly was that? Was it in the middle of Willits? So you're saying it's 1 mile north of city limits. So that I think addresses the question that was raised last meeting on that point.
So. Yeah. I went back and watched it, and I think you guys, it took care of it. Yeah, and basically it's right where the railroad crosses Highway 101 there, just past the new new bypass, and it's split there. It's sort of a strange place to split it, but NCRA owns property there that would then come, so that would be a jumping off point for the trail. I will say that Mendocino County has done a really good job and has put a lot of time and effort into the trails plan, as have Willits and Ukiah. And one of the goals of this new process is to make that as easy as possible. We want to assist the cities and the counties in trying to create, any trails that are along, or any process that are along the right of way, and not interfere with them, and to try to make it as easy as possible. Just real quickly, there's been, the trail that they did in Arcata probably had an extra $4 million price tag put on it because they had to put it alongside the rails instead of on top of the rails. There's never going to be a train on those rails. It was ridiculous to add another $4 million to be on it, just to be blunt with you guys. And I don't want to, the goal of this is to build a trail contiguously from San Francisco Bay to Humboldt Bay, and not wait for a train sometime in the future to interfere with it. That's where we are.
Does the senator's office have any feedback on our request for changes to the composition of the two boards?
Definitely, and I'll throw it back to you for some further consideration, and then we're going to have to make a decision at some point in the near future. The way NCRA was originally set up was with 9 board members, and all of them were local board members, local representatives. It didn't work very well. The state basically abandoned NCRA right from the start. The Department of Transportation, Caltrans never attended the meetings unless they were there to argue with them or fight with them, and there was no real ownership with it. So we took that to heart when we created this. Right now, the way it's designed is the Senate, or the governor gets 2 appointments, one for the Department of Natural Resources and one for the Department of Transportation. That's to kind of give buy-in. Then the state Senate and the state legislature and the state assembly both have appointees, both of which I'm assuming will be local people to be appointed to it. And then the member of the Board of Supervisors from Mendocino County for the GRTA, and a member of the Board of Supervisors for Humboldt County will be on it. And then there's that one last slot. We're trying to keep it to 7 people, just because you guys have probably all been on boards that have 10, 13, 15 people, and it just makes things a lot more complicated and a lot harder. So we're trying to keep it to 7. It may come down to a point where we have to expand it to 9. We want to have as much state representation on there as possible so we don't make the mistake we did before. I think that the last slot that we have right now, it's obvious that it should be a municipal representative. Just not quite sure how to do it, or whether we're going to have to add a couple of more people as well. But we've got your letter. The Senator totally understands what you're looking for. We're just fighting with, trying to make sure there's state representation, keep it as small as possible, and give everybody representation. I just met with a bunch of landowners in the Eel River Canyon this morning that wanted 3 representatives on the GRTA board, and I had to explain to them the same thing, that a huge board is unwieldy and doesn't really work. So we have that. I think it makes sense if we have a municipal person, and I'm not sure exactly how to balance it between Mendocino and Humboldt. It's sort of a long way of answering your question. I apologize for.
Could that last member be a person who was selected by a joint selectee from the Board of Supervisors from Humboldt and Mendocino?
It could. I mean, there's such, I don't want to say this the wrong way, since there's a couple of supervisors in the room. There's always a little bit of angst among city council members that that the Board of Supervisors are telling them who can do what. So I don't know if that would work for them, but it kind of makes sense. There's also something that's been done, at least in Sonoma County. When I was on the Healdsburg City Council, there was, you guys are in the Redwood region for League of Cities, I believe. And so the League of Cities Redwood region makes the appointment. And it has to be, and we can set it up so that it says it has to be from a member of a city who has the right of way contained within their city. So Willits and then going all the way up north. So it couldn't be somebody who, it couldn't be Fort Bragg. It has to be somebody who actually has the right of way in their territory. And then they get to choose every 2 years they could renew. So for 2 years it could be somebody from Humboldt, then it could be somebody from Mendocino, or do whatever they like that way. That's another option, but we're open. I haven't heard a specific request besides from you and from HCOG as to how to do this. So if you've got any advice as to how to assign that last slot specifically, very willing to take it. Kind of like to leave it up to you guys.
Yeah, I think you should try to get more local people and expand it from 7 to more. I think it's a disservice to the people that live in this area not to have somebody represent them, and it's overloaded with people outside the area. And once again, the bureaucracy is going to run something with just one person that represents the 2 counties that are involved.
Why one person?
Because you just said there's going to be that 7th member is either going to be somebody from Humboldt or from Mendocino.
So it'll be 3 people guaranteed from the local, right? So if you have it, one person from municipal, and then you've got one member of the Board of Supervisors from Humboldt, one member of the Board of Supervisors from Mendocino, that's 3 on a 7-member board. And then the 2 people that are appointed by the Senate and by the Assembly will be people from this area. The only 2 people that will be from the state and outside this area would be from the Board of from the Natural Resources Department or Department of Transportation.
I just don't agree with having such a small board, because a couple extra members is not going to make it that much of a problem. And I think it would be better to have more people than less.
So you would suggest expanding it to how many?
2 more.
To 9.
1 extra from Mendocino and 1 extra from Humboldt.
Okay. Got it.
So for clarification, so you're saying there'll be 1 person from appointed by Department of Transportation. Would there be who exactly would make that appointment?
The governor. The governor makes the appointments for the departments. Okay. So they would appoint somebody from the Bureau, the Department of Natural Resources, which would probably come from Parks. They probably, and they appoint 1 from the Department of Transportation that would probably come from Caltrans.
Okay. So essentially it'll be a Caltrans employee appointed by the governor's office and a state parks person.
Most likely. It doesn't have to be an employee, but it would probably be, so I would think.
And out of just thinking aloud here, I'm wondering if you'd want to be more specific and maybe say state parks rather than natural resources, because you've probably experienced this on your time on the Healdsburg City Council, but there are times, believe it or not, when state agencies are at odds with each other. State departments,
Yes.
you know, where even within state parks, we've had state parks employees who want the coastal trail on the coast, and there's
Right.
and there are state parks employees who don't want the public in the park.
Yes.
And so, you know, just trying to think through the vision for this, which is to see a successful trail.
Right.
I don't think you're really wanting to see a future appointee to come in there who's really working at odds with the mission of the goal of the project.
Yeah.
So I don't know who exactly that would be within natural resources, but I mean there are definitely people within some state employees who work for natural resource agencies who, believe it or not, see it as their mission to basically stop things.
Understood.
And Fish and Wildlife comes to mind.
I'm not going to argue with you there.
So you might put some thought into
Okay.
who that is from the Natural Resource Agency.
That's an excellent thought. I think I get your meaning. I think our thinking was that the higher up in the departmental ranking, the better, because it's all about money at that point, and we want somebody with some authority who can go back and have some respect in Sacramento when it comes to it, because NCRA, again, did not have any of that. But I take your meaning very well. So,
go ahead.
And I had a couple of questions on Section 2, some of the changes. If you can just give me a little background on why they were stricken out. So the one is transferring the NCRA property, et cetera, south of Willits, taking out for the purpose of creating a passenger and freight railroad service. So that's been stricken. And then the next section, D, also for provide funding, has also been taken out.
those were amendments that the Appropriations Committee put in there. And again, from the funding, I'll take the funding aspect of it. Everything that deals with funding is sort of in negotiation. So right now, it's the bill, as you read it, doesn't have a funding source for the three different buckets for paying for the right-of-way right now, for dealing with the acquisition of it, or for paying for the trail. That's kind of all being done, and hopefully we'll all come together probably in August at some point. So that's why they put that in there. Right for right now, it's just sort of temporary language that the appropriation wanted. With regard to the train, I think right now the only thing that we have in there for that is to create the freight study that will be from Willits all the way into basically from milepost 0 in Sonoma to 142.5. And then the freight study will determine what happens with freight. I will say, from a perspective of just looking at it logically, smart is probably to get the tracks right now at Airport Boulevard in Sonoma County to Cloverdale, between 8 and 10 years away. And so anything that happens with freight and rails north of there would have to have that connector in there first. So we're probably a good 10 years, a decade at least away from talking about anything realistic with freight in Mendocino County.
Okay. I guess I just have some concerns that we've taken out funding, and we've taken out the purpose of maintaining a railroad. But
well, there is no railroad, so there is no funding for it. Yeah, so that's why they took it out.
What you're just saying, because there is none, there
is no railroad. There hasn't been a railroad in 20 years, and there's not going to be a railroad anytime in the next 10 years. So there's no funding for it. And again, the other side of it is that there's the funding mechanism for the taking care of the right-of-way itself and for purchasing NCRA will go back into the bill once it gets to the Appropriations Committee over in the Assembly side. But you're completely right. It's not in there right now. Okay. Yeah, we're a long ways away from anything involving freight trains in Mendocino County.
Go ahead, Laura.
Could you please comment on why Caltrans was taken out of the legislation?
They didn't want to be in. When we were dealing with District 1 early on in the process of kind of coming up with this legislation, they've done a lot of work with NCRA. They've been a part of all of the parcel analysis and the easements and things, and it seemed like a logical thing for them to be sort of a placeholder while we're going through all of the easement reviews and the environmental, because they have a lot of attorneys on board and they've got a lot of folks that do CEQA review. So we put them in there as a placeholder for a couple of years before the GRTA got up and running. Then the State Department of Transportation finally started looking at the language seriously in the last couple of weeks and decided that they in fact did not want to be, that they had their hands full with the bridges and roads and other things, and they didn't want to have this on their plate. So we understood and took them out, which is why it may not actually end up in the Department of the Transportation Assembly Committee. Since they're out, it may just go to Natural Resources since it's a park.
Yeah. My problem is, why is this? We're talking about the railroad and the trail, right? Yes.
I'm not sure what you're asking. Are we talking about a
railroad to Willits?
Yeah. Okay. My problem is, why is it so loaded with people from the Bay Area and not many people from that rural area, which is Mendocino County, like Ukiah or Willits, or wherever the railroad goes along the railroad?
Yeah.
Why is it so loaded with the people from the Bay Area and not so much equal with the people in the northern part?
Totally understand. So you're talking about the SMART.
You have to speak up also.
Sorry, you're talking about the SMART. I don't know if this is on or not, but the SMART Board of Directors. Is that what you're talking about?
I think so.
For the southern segment, from Willits down to the Bay Area. Is that what you're talking about? Okay, so SMART has a board that's already currently put together, right? And they've got their train. They're the ones that invested all of the money into getting the train all the way from Marin up to Airport Boulevard. And they're the ones that'll have the $400 million that will eventually get it to Cloverdale, and then perhaps up into Mendocino County, a long way away.
So maybe to step back, the voters of Sonoma and Marin counties by a 2/3 vote passed, was it a 1/4 cent or 1/8? It was a
eighth, and now yes,
eighth of a cent sales tax that they're collecting in Sonoma and Marin counties for the SMART train.
Thank you.
And so that's why they have their own board. And now through this legislation, you're actually amending their board of directors to a small extent.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, and so right now the only Mendocino County, it's not anticipated is ever going to get SMART. It's not going to get a passenger rail up here. It's going to be very difficult to get freight rail up here. And again, that decision probably won't be made for another few years. If and when there's going to be freight rail up here, then of course it would make more sense for the SMART board to have more representatives from Mendocino County. And we're open to doing it in any other way. But Supervisor Jarity is right. The folks in Mendocino, the folks in Sonoma and Marin are the ones paying the bills with their tax dollars. So that's why they have a majority of people on the board.
And probably my last question is the one that has haunted me the worst, is in your original bill, signpost 142.5 was stated that it was in the city of Willits. And I'm probably the only one in the world that has walked the line a couple of times looking for that. And the best I could come up with is 140. And now I read that it's 2 miles past. And which is absolutely, there's nothing there other than a Highway 101 where it passes it.
Right, and that's exactly right. And we've taken that out of the bill in the latest draft that I have in front of me here. So it no longer says 142.5 in the city of Willits. It just says milepost 142.5, and that is right where the railroad tracks cross 101, just north of the bypass. They actually paved over them a while back. Maybe you remember. They used to be right there.
I guess I'm just looking at it from a different point of view. I just don't understand how it's going to work out there. Are they going to, if I was going to leave the Bay Area and go to this Redwood Trail, would they let me off at 101 and where the railroad crosses, or would they let me off in Willits so that I could go from there? I don't understand.
Sure.
I'm not real bright on trails, but I'd rather be let off where I could buy a pair of sneakers and be let off out in the wilderness.
Got it. So I'm sure I should have started with this, but this will be a contiguous trail from San Francisco Bay all of the way to Humboldt Bay. It's just split in two for two different agencies to to have responsibility for building the trail. The SMART Board of Directors will build everything from 142.5 all the way down to Marin. And they already have they're building their trail right now all the way up to Windsor. And then we're going to add money to it to build it all the way to Willits. And then the Great Redwood Trail Agency will take on the responsibility of the northern section. And so there will, who knows where the station will be. I suspect that the obvious place to park and start hiking on here will be in the city of Willits, city of Ukiah, Hopland, Cloverdale, those places. But you could, at some point, you will be able to get on a bicycle or walk from, when you get off the ferry from San Francisco in Larkspur, and walk all the way to Humboldt.
Okay.
That's the plan.
Okay, and well, I have several questions now. Where did the 142.5, where is that start?
142.5 is approximately 1 mile north of the city limits of Willits.
No, I'm not talking about that on the other end, because if you look at the
okay, I'm sorry. 1 point. You mean where's milepost 0.1?
Yeah.
Is in the city of, just outside the city of Sonoma. Okay. So it goes through the coast and then kind of cuts into Marin County and then back into Sonoma County, right near the city of Sonoma.
Okay, and then maybe one of my last ones.
Sure.
Is where is 284?
284 is at C Street in Eureka.
And so 305 is in Arcata?
No, there's nothing in the Arcata because it kind of bends around and goes to Sonoma. It's 300.5 is the end of the line, and it's in Samoa. It's at the Roundhouse in Samoa.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. My pleasure.
I mean, everybody else knew this except me.
No, it's great questions. I love that you're paying attention so closely to the mileposts.
Because these are the things that come up in my council. In fact, my council that had no clue about this at all until I brought it up when we brought it up here, which is a month ago.
Perfect.
So
right. Happy to answer anything else.
I'm waiting for it. It can happen tomorrow as far as I'm concerned.
Us too.
And I just think it's going to be a boom to the whole area.
I think economically, I mean, outdoor recreation in the United States is a $92 billion a year industry. It's going to be something that, the construction obviously is going to require, we're going to require locally sourced construction. We're also going to ask that they use the CCC, wherever possible, and then local organizations to build the trail and to do the environmental and mitigation work. And then once it's up and running, this is an Appalachian style, trail style outdoor recreation event. So it should be very successful economically.
I just have a quick question. Do you know what it's going to cost to do the whole thing?
No, there's no real estimates on it. So, we've built trails, all over the state. Sometimes it's $1 million a mile. Sometimes it's $10,000 a mile, and it just kind of depends on where. Obviously, in the more rural areas, it's generally cheaper unless you have geotechnically very unstable ground, like we do in the Eel River Canyon. But if you're building in the middle of Marin, there have been Marin trails built for $2 or $3 million for a mile, and then sometimes more.
And then, does anybody know what it's going to cost to maintain it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, there's definitely there's industry figures out there. So they've built 9,000 miles of trails on rails across the United States. And they're currently building another 10,000 miles of it. So almost 20,000 miles in the next few years will be gone from rails and put into trails. And there's very steadfast figures as to how much it costs to maintain and what they do. It's a fairly strong.
But you don't know what that is.
It just depends on again what kind of trail it is. And so we're leaving it up to the successor agencies to decide. So if you have a paved trail, it's actually a lot cheaper. It's more costly up front, but it's a lot cheaper to maintain. This isn't going to be a paved trail. It'll be paved like through obviously the city of Willits and the city of Ukiah and the city of Cloverdale, but for the most part, you're going north of Willits, it actually won't be. So it'll cost a lot less to start, but it's much cheaper to do. It can be anywhere from less than $1,000 a mile per year to $100,000 a mile per year.
Is this going to be funded with general fund revenue out of the state?
Not the the SB. There's bond funds that are available for the construction for it. Maintenance is a completely different story, and then there's the possibility of using general funds for the actual purchase of the NCRA debt that we're working on right now.
Because I know you guys have a vision that's way clearer than what we probably have, because you've been planning this for a long time, and I was just curious. the funding source to maintain it. Because we put in probably 2.5 miles of trail and just a walking trail, and it's costing us $100,000 a year to manage to do 3 miles. I can imagine 300 miles.
You mean for maintenance or for building?
Just to maintain it.
To maintain it. What's the largest cost you have for maintenance?
Going out and patrolling the trail and making sure all the garbage is picked up and everything.
Yeah, there's no question that in the urban areas, it costs more to take care of, for sure.
So I was just curious. So are they going to use gas tax on this, or does anybody have any idea how this is going to be funded?
From a construction standpoint, I don't think the gas tax dollars are going to be available for several years. Depends on what happens in November, of course. But SB 5 and the Parks Bond, of course, has many millions of dollars for things like this. On purpose.
I have a question.
Of course.
One of these.
So just, you've talked about funding a lot, for construction, now maintenance, but what about operation of the agency, especially now that Caltrans is, the interim 2 years,
Sure.
Caltrans is out of the proposed legislation. So how is that, the operations of that agency going to be funded? Because I know that's, that's an issue that NCRA, they didn't have operations.
It'll most likely have to be a state agency that's actually running the, so the GRTA board will be an oversight agency and will control like where the money goes and the community engagement process, and then a state agency actually doing the day-to-day work as part of their ongoing operation. So just for instance, we have $4.1 million into the FY 18-19 Senate budget that's right now before the governor and the Assembly and the Senate negotiating, which is more money than NCRA has been able to get for their maintenance for the last 10 years combined. That money will go directly for what you're talking about, O&M on maintaining the trail the way it is. You guys probably have NCRA crossings in your county that are bottoming out and in a bit of a disaster. We'd like to be able to take care of those things right up front. So we're going to have to take money to do some of the backlog of maintenance that's on it even before we start the process of building the trail.
But the actual, so like paying the agency staff, not maintenance, but that is,
That's what the three, but yeah, so the $1 million, we have $1 million for the GRTA in the, just GRTA in the next fiscal year. And that would be for starting that's for paying for staff, that's for, making sure, I think they have 3 different assignments in the latest draft, the 2 and the one you're looking at, but cataloging the easements and doing the environmental assessment and starting that process.
And then what about in the proposed legislation? It talks about staff housing and then reimbursements to local agencies as well. Where would the funding for those things come from?
That's all, so that's language that was already in the SMART initiating language, and they just asked for, they would like to have expanded authority to build worker housing on their property in Santa Rosa. That's specifically what that is about. And if you guys wanted it, obviously we can do it for you too, but I'm not sure it's really required up here at this point. That makes sense? Yeah, most of the language that you see in that section is all already in the code. And all we did was we just put it all in there because you have to add putting housing in as something that they can actually do. Cool. Any other questions, concerns? Ideas?
I think this is a real big opportunity to kind of untangle a mess that was created a few decades ago with the NCRA and trying to make productive use of this property in a way that helps the economy. So, I hope the progress moves forward and the bill moves forward, and just again hope you think of how to implement your vision and how those appointees will be put in place that will have the same vision that I think that you have.
I understand that, and I've got your notes, and I understand your direction as far as who to appoint from the state side of things. I like that.
So we do have on the agenda. We have the opportunity to send a letter of support if we want.
Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Any questions?
Would you like to send a letter of support? Generally, I think legislation and legislators tend to listen to comments of people who've supported their bill a little more than the ones who just criticized it. Does someone want to offer a motion to send a letter of support?
It seems to be general consensus that this is a good idea. I would support a letter of support.
Okay.
I'll make a motion that we do a letter of support.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
I thought you made the motion.
I thought it was too, but that's all right. It doesn't matter.
Motion and second.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything specific we want to add to the letter, or just, you know, that reiterate our general comments that we made in the last letter?
I mean, the only thing that I do have concerns about is, again, and I mean, he said he's going to come later on, but that there's no funding listed again. But I guess, you know, if that's going to be worked in later, okay. But
if you don't mind, just real quick, there will be no bill if there's no funding. If there's not a funding agreement, then then the bill won't go forward. It has to have a funding side of it. Completely agree.
Despite things being stricken out on funding and there being no listed specific funding.
Yeah. Anything that's in there on funding is still up in the air and being kind of negotiated in a separate way than the policy side of things. Just kind of the way it goes from the administration side of things. That has to be resolved before the policy and the financial stuff combine in the Assembly Appropriations Committee, for sure.
Do you mind if I just ask, historically, had the NCRA get away with no funding then? What was its formation?
They literally had two funding bills go to the governor, two bills go to the governor, and the governor vetoed the funding bill and allowed the second bill to go forward that created NCRA. So we're not going to make that mistake.
Okay.
And I don't think the legislature would even let us, even if we wanted to, and they shouldn't. You should never have an agency like this that's not funded. 30 years of, you know, of a big mess.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is why I address, I mean, that's
totally
why I have the concerns.
Well, I spend most of my time working on the financing and the appropriation side of this thing because it's the biggest part.
So it sounds.
Excuse me, do they have any idea how much all of this is going to cost? I mean, the railroad cost, maybe she just asked that, I don't remember.
Well, NCRA is currently in debt to the tune of about $9.8 million. And whether or not all of that is completely legitimate is part of the problem right now. Some people think it is, some people think it isn't, but it's a pretty hard figure of $9.8 million is what they're in debt. And that includes to their employees, it includes to the federal government, it includes to the freight operator.
And what about the trail?
The what?
The trail.
The funding for
how
the
much
trail.
it would cost for the trail? Like I said, we've got $3.1 million to start the process, to get $4.1 million over the next year and a half to start the process, to figure out exactly what it's going to cost and to start fixing what's been there in the process. It can cost, like we were talking about earlier, anywhere from $10,000 a mile to $1 million a mile. And we're talking about 300 miles, roughly.
Thank you.
However, a lot of it's already been built, like a lot of the stuff in Sonoma County. The more expensive one, SMART is building and already has the mandate to build.
Thank you.
I had a quick question. There was some debt that had public property as collateral, you know, some properties of the rail, and so this debt will be paid off. That means those will stay in public hands, right? Do you know what I'm talking about with NCRA? They
yes.
had gotten some loans that they had to.
Are you talking about the private ones or the public ones?
Loretta, do you remember?
Well, I know they tried to collateralize the Ukiah Depot, but that did not happen.
I don't think it did.
It didn't happen?
There
Okay.
is some private ones, but I think those loans have been released as far as I
Okay.
hear, but it is part of the debate. And the complication with unraveling all of this is the money side of it is exactly what is owed. But yeah, if you're talking about the Ukiah Depot, that's a mess in another way, but it's not from that side.
Yeah, maybe pieces of property from that, or yeah. So I was just concerned that we want to keep those things in public hands, right?
So, suffice it to say, if the debts that get paid off, nothing would change from that perspective. If there's public land already there, the goal is to keep it all, keep the trail completely in public hands. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Of course.
So we've got some motion. I just want to clarify, though. I think we might want to have in our letter reiterating our you know, requests and also to reiterate or iterate the point that we do want to see that the funding for the implementation is part of an overall package.
Right. I think just saying having, you know, we support this and an adequately funded agency, you know, however we want to word it. But
so I think with that general direction, staff can go ahead and write. Go ahead.
I have one question about the way this is written, where it says the Board of Supervisors of the County of Mendocino may appoint one of its members to serve as a board member. Could that be changed to the Council of Governments of Mendocino, which has more people and actually has local representatives on it? And then you can actually end up with local representatives as the representative that's on. This is a question I'm asking the board.
Yeah, you could have that. You could also, I'm curious, is that language pretty standard in that sometimes a board of supervisors or a city council will appoint a member of the public rather than one of their members? So with the language that you have in there, is it limited just to one of the 5 supervisors, or
yeah.
That's what they changed it to in this draft.
And I will just say, having looked at boards for many, many years, it usually, when you're looking for state funds, it's better to have an elected official on the board than it is to have a member of the public.
Okay, that's the reasoning behind it?
Yeah,
Well,
honestly.
yes, but other than myself, as I'm the only publicly appointed official, these people are all representatives of city governments.
Yep.
So you would have an elected official, it just wouldn't necessarily be a supervisor, it would be a councilman or a mayor.
We're open. If you guys want to think about it and put it in the letter, I promise you we will consider it, but it just has to be relatively soon in the next week or so. If you guys have a specific recommendation, then I think you, or change what you've put in there so far.
I'm asking this of the board
I'll
as
let
opposed
you guys
to you.
work that out.
To see,
We'll
I
take
know
your advice.
that no matter how it's written in here, you can write it in here that, anybody could be. But if it's changed to a member of the Mendocino Council of Governments may be appointed as a member, then it expands it to 7 people as opposed to 5, and it doesn't drop it on a supervisor who's already overloaded.
That is in the letter that you sent last time. You asked for representatives from the Mendocino Council of Governments.
Okay.
If you're talking about the Trail Agency Board, you're talking about the new Trail Board?
Yes, he is.
Yes. Yes.
So I think our previous
Right.
recommendation
Okay,
had
okay.
MCOG on it.
Right.
So I think I would recommend we just stay with our previous.
Letter with the funding addition.
They've already
Correct.
answered.
Okay, right. Well,
Okay,
I think
that was the only thing I
we've
was
got a
asking.
motion, and I think we've got enough information for the staff to finalize the letter. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Loretta, maybe we can go back to item number 8.
Okay, you have before you the proposed final overall work program for fiscal year 18-19. As I reported at prior meetings, the TAC reviewed and recommended that the draft be approved and submitted to Caltrans in March, so that was done. We received some minor comments from Caltrans which have been incorporated, and since I reported to you last month, we've taken the draft and then we've added over carryover projects, and we've tried to update some carryover estimates. So the proposed final before you today includes 6 carryover projects, and we were able to include every agency request that was submitted for funding, and we're able to meet the required contract for Davy Bates Consulting. And the proposed final work program now includes 19 work elements and totals $1,221,126, which was approved in the budget action that you just took. So we are looking for a motion to adopt the final work program and authorize the executive director or designee to sign the certifications and OWP agreement and forward to Caltrans as required. And I'd be happy to respond to any questions. I can give you more detail if you want it, but.
Okay, I'm not seeing hands jump up for additional questions. Does someone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to adopt the 2018-2019 Planning Overall Work Program.
I'll second
it.
Okay. Money involved, so I think it's roll call.
It does require.
Yeah. Okay. Stransky. Stransky.
Yes.
Wasserman.
Yes.
Chimolino.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Krosky.
Yes.
Jackman.
Yes.
And Jurdy.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the consent calendar. So we have approval of the May 2018 minutes, adoption of a resolution approving the Mendocino Transit Authority's grant application for Federal Transit Administration non-urbanized program annual apportionment for transit operating assistance, and also resolution approving the programming of FTA intercity bus program funds for Mendocino Transit. Is there a motion to approve the consent?
I didn't want to interrupt you, but Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull number 12 for separate action. I need to identify the funding amount in the resolution there.
For what reason?
We did not know the amount of funding available or how much would be applied for.
Do you have that figure now?
Yes. So that was agenda item 12, and that's for the FTA section 5311F intercity bus program. And you have that draft resolution, which does not, and a staff report, which does not say how much they'd be applying for. So MTA intends to apply for $350,000, and I would like to amend that resolution. In the third bullet down, it says this funding request is for operating assistance, continued funding of MTA's Route 65 service. And it went on to say up to the amount of available funds for Mendocino County. I would like to say up to $350,000. And there's a little history there. They've applied for the same type of funding for several years running. And the first couple of times was for $300,000. Last time they applied for that, but they got less funding. There was less available in the end, and they have some confidence that they can at least ask for the $350. There's a little more funding, and whether or not they get the whole amount is in question, but they intend to apply for that amount.
Okay, so the resolution for item 12 would simply state up to $350,000.
Yes, I just want to add up to $350,000
okay,
will be.
So with that amendment, we could still just approve the consent calendar, I think.
Yeah, I'd like to just have a separate action to do that.
Can't we just amend it? Why does it need to be a separate action?
Well, maybe not necessarily. We could say the consent calendar as amended.
Yeah.
Okay. That works for me.
Does someone want to make that motion?
I will move that the consent calendar be approved with amendments.
Great.
Okay. Roll call, I think.
Stransky.
Yes.
Wasserman.
Yes.
Chimolino.
Yes.
Carter.
Yes.
Krosky.
Yes.
Jackman.
Yes.
And Jurdy.
Yes. Okay, now we're going to recess as the Policy Advisory Committee, reconvene as the Regional Transportation Planning Agency, and do we have a motion to ratify the actions of the Policy Advisory Committee?
Move to ratify.
I will second.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, now we're on to reports. I think we have nothing at the moment from MTA, although they were in the various action items. North Coast Rail Authority, we maybe talked that one to death today. And unless there's something you want to add, Loretta, if there's something from a recent meeting, this is probably the major item for them. MCOG staff summary meetings, which we do have as a handout. Any highlights there? Then administrative staff.
I'd just like to, I wanted to backtrack and infill that when I talked about the Covelo Trail funding, that is in the resolution under administration, that Down Associates has a responsibility for managing that project, and that's where those funding numbers went. And just to say, the next meeting will be August 20th.
And that's to split the difference because of Labor Day and the summer.
We typically do not meet in July, and the first Monday is around July 4th holiday. And
so
September's around Labor Day usually.
Third Monday in August, yeah.
Yeah, so we had in our adopted board calendar the 20th. Here in these chambers.
Same time.
And that's kind of meant to bridge the gap between this early June meeting and the next probably September. If we do a tour in September or maybe a regular meeting in October, it's kind of middle of August sort of bridges that gap. So.
Okay. Anything else from administrative staff? No. Planning staff?
Just one brief report to let you know that we will be having the first community workshop under our pedestrian facility needs study, and it will be June 19th in Point Arena. So we're working with the consultant to plan that, and it will be well advertised in Point Arena. It's actually the South Coast workshop. It will cover Point Arena, Wallala, and the South Coast area.
Okay, so any reports from directors? California Association of Council Governments, I don't have any particular information from them. CalCog?
They had a recent meeting.
Okay. Okay, well then at 3:20, we'll adjourn the June meeting.
Thank you, everyone.